Greetings, everyone, and welcome to God Save the King. You can listen to God Save the King every Friday night at 10 p.m. Eastern on the Truth Be Told Radio Network. And that, of course, is www.truthbetoldnetwork.org. Simply go to that website, click on the big listen button, and you can be listening to God Save the King again every Friday night at 10 p.m. Eastern. There's also plenty of other great shows on the Truth Be Told network, so we definitely encourage you to listen to those as well. And as always, my views that I express here on God Save the King are not necessarily the views of the Truth Be Told Radio Network. Also, there are a lot of ways that you can listen to the Truth Be Told Radio Network. You can, of course, like we just said, listen at their website. Click on the big listen button. You can listen on your Android app, which is a free download. You can listen on MyTuner, okay? You can listen on Wi-Fi radio, TuneIn radio. You can listen on Alexa, Google, and Apple home devices, as well as dial in on your phone, 641-741-2866 or 717-567-4977, and listen right on your phone. And last but not least, always please remember, we would sure appreciate it if you would go to our Facebook pages, both Truth Be Told and God Save the King, and give us a like or a follow or a subscribe. And that helps us out a lot with the algorithm and stuff like that to get our show out there. So we have been talking extensively about recalculating the birth of Jesus Christ. That is one of the preeminent features of God Save the King, is that we talk about the fact that Jesus was not actually born on December 25th. Because if we want to tell this story accurately, if we want to get a really good idea in our head, carry around a proper mental picture of what the birth of Jesus Christ looked like, the first thing we've got to recognize is that he wasn't born on December 25th. And all of the imagery that we have gotten through the centuries about a December 25th birth date, and that it was a cold winter's night, and that Jesus was born in a stable, and that Joseph, Mary, and Jesus were, outcasts in a fashion because the evil innkeeper, wouldn't give them a place to stay. These are almost uniformly incorrect. Okay, it isn't what the Bible teaches. It's what someone conceived of hundreds or even thousands of years ago. It's the idea that they got stuck in their head, and then that became the tradition. And unfortunately, it's just not what the Bible teaches. Jesus was not born in a stable. He was born in a traditional Judean home. He was not born on December 25th. He was born on September 11th in the fall. He was born on a Hebrew feast day. And what we've been working on extensively is to figure out not only now I went ahead and spilled the beans there. I believe he's absolutely born on September 11th to 3 BC. But how do we reach that conclusion? Well, there's a variety of different ways. And what we've been doing is we have been following the evidence. That's the whole point. Let's follow the evidence. Let's start with a blank slate. Let's wipe the slate clean, blank canvas, and then one by one, let's take pieces of information and see where they direct us. Not start with a hypothesis. We're actually not starting with a hypothesis on this one. We want to take each piece of information and go, okay, where does that lead me? Okay, where does that lead me? And then as we follow that, we can start to develop this. Actually, this is how you develop a hypothesis in many ways, and then see if you can prove to be true. So let's review several of the things that we have covered so far. This is a graphic that I have used extensively. And if you're looking at my screen, you should be able, whoops, didn't want to do that. There we go. You should be able to see this graphic. Okay, where'd my picture go? There I am. Okay, so here's my cursor over here, right? And this is what we have covered so far. So statement number one, right here. Augustus Caesar reigned from 27 BC to 14 CE, okay? Therefore, Jesus was born in about a 40-year window between 27 BC and 14 CE. Okay, Common Era, right? And I switch back and forth. By the way, most of the time I say before Christ or after Christ, before Christ or Anno Domini, BC and AD. But I also do switch back and forth and frequently use before the Common Era or Common Era, right? Okay, so I use them both because they're both valid ways of doing this. All right, so next, this statement right here. Herod the Great reigned from 37 BCE to 4 BCE, okay? And that's cited in Matthew chapter 2, verse 1. Therefore, Jesus was born. I see what we're doing here is we're combining the two. We're combining the two pieces of evidence together. So now we know Jesus was born in, we presume, in a 23-year window from 27 BCE to 4 BCE. But, however, we've also talked extensively about this. The 4 BCE date for Herod being born is incorrect. Herod dying is incorrect. Herod actually died in early 1 BC. So now we have to correct this, but we now know Jesus was born during a 26-year window between 27 BCE and early 1 BCE, okay? Now, when the Magi show up at the court of Herod the Great and they announce, "Where is he that is born King of the Jews?" And then Herod inquires of them, "When did the star appear that indicated the birth of this Messiah?" The Magi told him what they saw, and from that information, Herod determined, Matthew 2:16, to kill every male child in and around Bethlehem 2 years old and younger, okay? Now, I believe he added a margin of error to that. I don't think he got the information from the Magi, and the Magi said, "Oh, 2 years," and he just went, "Okay, well, 2 years it is," right? I think they told him, "Oh yeah, the sign we saw occurred about 18 months ago," right? And then Herod went, "Okay, good, let's add 6 months for good measure, and we'll kill every child from 2 years old and under," okay, to make sure he kills this threat to his throne, right? God save the king. Now, so that means if we take Herod's margin of error into consideration, that means Jesus was born in a 2-year period of time between early 3 BC and early 1 BC, okay? Now, let's add one more piece of information, which is the decree from Augustus Caesar that involved this oath of allegiance prior to him being named Pater Patriae, the father of the country. That decree went out in the early summer of 3 BC, and it had to be completed by the early winter of 2 BC. So now, as we have stepped through these different pieces of information, we have now narrowed it down that Jesus was born between the summer of 3 BCE and winter 2 BCE. Okay, so now you're looking at somewhere, in the order of not more than about 9 months, and really maybe only about a 6-month window to determine when Jesus was born. All right. So with that in mind, I want to look at some additional evidence here. We're going to look at some additional evidence, and the evidence that we are going to look at involves John the Baptist, okay? Because when we talk about John the Baptist, there's a very important piece of information, which is this, okay? We're going to get this up on the screen here. Here we go. Luke chapter 2, verse 1, it says, in the 6th month, okay? Now, this is the 6th month of Elizabeth's pregnancy. In the 6th month, the angel Gabriel was sent from God unto the city of Galilee named Nazareth to a virgin espoused to a man whose name was Joseph of the house of David, and the virgin's name was Mary. And the angel came in unto her and said, Hail, thou art highly favored. The Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women. So this is the annunciation to Mary that she is going to bear the Messiah. But the key piece of information here, okay, the key piece of information that is part of this is this 6-month thing, okay? The 6 months. we understand from this verse, okay, that John the Baptist was conceived 6 months prior to Jesus being conceived. So now, based upon what we just said, that Jesus was most likely born during about a 6-month window from roughly June of 3 BC until about December of 3 BC, okay? And maybe plus or minus a month or two here or there, but really we're looking at maybe a 6 to 8, maybe a 9-month window. Now what we can do is we can plug in the fact that, okay, John is essentially 6 months older. So now if we look at the chronology, so remember what I've said before, and that is the nativity narratives, the infancy narratives of Matthew and Luke contain a boatload of chronological indicators. They are just all over the place. The fact that this one here in Luke chapter 2, verse 1 says, and in the 6th month, right? Okay. Now, that means Elizabeth had been pregnant for 6 months. That helps us understand the timing of all this, right? So if Jesus was born in a 6-month window between June and December, right? Now you can move that forward and say, all right, well, John, therefore, axiomatically, had to have been born in a 6-month window between about January and June, basically, right? So now if we look at the story, right? If we look at the story of John the Baptist, what do we find? Do we find additional chronological indicators that may help us pinpoint when Jesus of Nazareth was born? Okay. And so let's do exactly that. Now, before we jump into the chronological indicators, I do want to take a minute here and talk about John the Baptist and his parents, right? Because this is no small thing here. There, frankly, were miraculous circumstances surrounding the birth of John the Baptist that undoubtedly had, the rumor mill was just do, okay? Because number one, you've got both Zechariah and Elizabeth the Bible says are well advanced in years. So they are not supposed to be biologically capable of producing a baby anymore. And all of a sudden they are. So, even if you believe it's a miracle, let alone if you don't, okay, all right. Lots of options here. But if you believe it's a miracle and you're in the local community in the hill country of Judea where Zechariah and Elizabeth lived, you're going, oh my God, what's going on here? Elizabeth is pregnant. How the heck is she pregnant? She's got to be at least, 50, 60 years old. Oh my God, how could she possibly be pregnant, right? Okay. And that's just the age factor. But then if you add in the announcement to Zechariah, see, because Zechariah was a priest, right? Zechariah was a priest, which means he served in the temple. And we're going to talk much more about that here in 1 second, because we're going to look into what being a priest meant, because it also meant serving in the temple at certain times of the year. And that is super critical because, see, there's our chronological indicator. If you're a priest serving in the temple, then there's certain times a year where you're serving in the temple. And Zechariah was clearly serving in the temple at one of these times. Can we determine when that was? And then can we add that to the information that we have so far and determine what that means? Okay. So, but let's talk about the story here for a second. So Zechariah is a priest. Okay. And during his service, part of what they did is they drew lots to determine which priest, because there would be a lot of priests on duty at one time, right? They determined which priest got the privilege of entering into the holy place and offering incense on the golden altar of incense. Now, this requires some pretty good scope of the Bible and what the Bible teaches, because if you have no idea what the holy place is or what the golden altar of incense is, you got some homework to do, because it maybe isn't Bible 101, but it's maybe Bible 201, okay? Because this is something you need to know to properly understand the Bible, is that there was these physical locations that the Jews worshiped in the Old Testament, okay? It started with the tabernacle of Moses, then it moved to the Temple of Solomon. The Temple of Solomon was destroyed, and now this is the rebuilt temple that was frankly rebuilt by Herod the Great. I mean, it was started by Zerubbabel and those guys when they came back after the Babylonian captivity, but now this is, my word, this is 500 years later, okay? And Herod is now renovating this temple, okay? And Herod's renovations were amazing, okay? But the point being here is that within so you had the temple itself, and you had what was called the outer court. Now anybody could go into the outer court, right? But then within the outer court was a building, the temple proper, and then within the temple were two subdivisions, the holy place and the holy of holies. Now, and they were separated by a heavy veil, okay? So, and only the priests could go in there, and only the high priest could go into the Holy of Holies, right? So when the priest would walk in the door to the holy place, there would be the golden table of showbread on his right, and then the golden lampstand on his left, and then directly in front of him would be the veil that separated the holy place from the Holy of Holies, and against the veil would be the golden altar of incense, right? So it's Zechariah's privilege to go into the holy place and burn incense on the golden altar of incense. And it's estimated that even if you served as a priest for the maximum duration that a priest could do this, you might only do this 1, 2, maybe 3 times in your entire service as a priest, that you got the privilege of going into the holy place and offering incense, okay? So this is a big deal, because this is what Zechariah is doing when he gets met by the angel Gabriel, and the angel Gabriel says, oh, by the way, your prayers have been answered. You're going to have a son, and you're going to name him John. But my point here is that the people, would have been gathered outside while Zechariah was inside offering incense at the golden altar of incense, right? So then he has this vision where he is visited by the angel Gabriel while he's inside, and you have to wonder, did this delay him a little bit? Was he inside longer than normal, right? He's inside longer than normal, and now you got people outside going, hey, where is he? What's going on? What's taking so long, right? I hope he's not dead. I hope he didn't die in the presence of God, because of some ceremonial uncleanness, right? So then, but eventually, Zechariah walks out of the holy place, and, there's got to be a collective sigh of relief, because, okay, he's not dead. Okay, great, But then he walks outside, and the people are looking at him because they're going, all right, what's going on? Because he looks different, and he's not talking. And it says that the people were frankly awestruck, because they quickly perceived that he had seen a vision. Something truly significant had happened, okay? And Zechariah can't speak, and they figure out that he's seen this vision. And, apparently, he must have done his best to communicate by, like hand signals or by writing or something to, figure out what's going on, right? Now, and I'm blasting through the story here, and we'll talk about certain details more in a second. Now, what we're not told is how far into his term of service he was, right? And we'll talk about that term of service a little more in detail here in a second too, right? How far into his term of service was there? Okay. Was he a day in? Was he 3 days in, 5 days in, whatever? But we know that his term of service ends and then he returns home. Now, because the temple is in Jerusalem and he lived in the hill country of Judea, he didn't live very far away. He only lived maybe 5 or 6 miles from the temple in Jerusalem. So, a good long walk and he's home, right? So he goes home, and despite both him and Elizabeth being well advanced in years, right, and undoubtedly bearing the biological challenges that age has on reproduction, miraculously they managed to conceive despite many, many, many years of, either impotence and or infertility, one or the other or both, right? And this is a really big deal. Now, we don't know for certain how soon the locals discovered that Elizabeth was pregnant, because it says she secluded herself, but eventually, she had to come out of hiding. And we're also told that, again, in the 6th month, Elizabeth is visited by her younger kinswoman, Mary from Nazareth, who is newly pregnant with the Messiah. Okay. And when Mary, quote unquote, knocks on the door, it says that upon meeting that the prenatal John leaped in the womb and Elizabeth became filled with the Holy Spirit. Now, this is no ordinary event, even for Zechariah, who is a priest, of the tribe of Levi and a son of Aaron, and then also Elizabeth, who we are also told is a daughter of Aaron. So see, this is really a big deal, and it makes sense that there would be such a commotion about this, because for the forerunner of the Messiah, no ordinary beginning is going to do. It's just simply not good enough. All right. So now let's dive into some of what this means chronologically, right? Because when we read the story of John the Baptist, right, and the birth of John the Baptist, a big part of what we are told, okay, here, I'll just read it to you. This is Luke chapter 1, verses 5 through 7. There was in the days of Herod, the king of Judah, a certain priest named Zechariah of the division of Abijah. Now, that's important. Remember that. The division of Abijah, the course of Abijah, right? His wife was of the daughters of Aaron, and her name was Elizabeth, and they were both righteous before God, walking in all the commandments and ordinances of the Lord, blameless. Now, that's huge, right? But they had no child because Elizabeth was barren, and they were both well advanced in years. Okay, so now what does this course of Abijah thing mean? Well, let's talk about this, because initially the priests all came from the tribe of Levi in general, and then the sons of Aaron in particular. So when Moses set up the tabernacle, okay, after, in the wilderness wanderings, right, when he came down out of Mount Horeb, right, he had stone tablets in one arm and, blueprints in another. And the blueprints were for this portable, movable worship center that we simply call the Tabernacle of Moses, right? And so what they did is they set up a rotation of the sons of Aaron, the priests, to serve in the temple. Okay. Now fast forward about 400 years, 400 to 600 years, right? And you get the Babylonian captivity, where both the northern kingdom first fell to the Assyrians, and then the southern kingdom falls to the Babylonians. Big chunks of the population are taken captive. The temple eventually is burned to the ground, right? It's destroyed, and the people taken captive. But then, roughly 60 years later, 70 years later, right? Because that's the prophecy, that Daniel was following 70 years later. They are released from captivity, and then they're sent home by the decree of Cyrus the Great. And what they discovered was, when they got back and they started rebuilding the temple, that the priestly families had been, devastated by the captivity. there had been intermarriage and there had been stuff like this, and you had, a challenge knowing who came from what family and stuff like that. So they were restructured. Okay. They were restructured, and the divisions of the priesthood, because see, for one thing, because you are looking at several hundred years later, there's a lot more of them. Okay. Despite the Babylonian captivity, now there's a lot more priests. There's a lot more. So they cannot all minister in the temple at the same time. So what they did is they set up a rotation. Okay. They set up a rotation for the priests to minister in the temple, and they were divided into 24 divisions, 24 courses based upon families. And then what would happen is that each family would serve in the temple for 2 weeks each year, but not consecutively. It would be 1 week, and then 6 months later, they'd do another week. Okay. So now bear with me a second here while I click on my computer here and try to get this graphic up here. So these are the divisions, okay, of the priestly families. There we go, right? So I'm not going to go through the list of names. It's not really critical that we go through all the names right now. But here are the priestly families. Let me try to get there with my cursor. There we go. So here are the priestly families, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 9 through 16, 17 through 24. And look at this one right over here. Number 8, the division of Abijah. The division of Abijah. And that's important because that is the division that Zechariah belonged to, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to try to determine when did the division of Abijah serve in the temple. Because if we can determine when that was, now we have an additional chronological clue to determine, right, when Jesus was born. Because once these divisions were set up, what they determined is starting with the beginning of the religious year, okay, which began in the religious year. See, here's the other thing, is you really got to know the Hebrew calendar to understand this, right? And the Hebrew religious calendar, you've actually got 2 different New Years. You've got the religious New Year, and then you've got the civil New Year. The religious New Year is in the spring. The civil New Year is in the fall, right? And we'll talk a lot more about this as we go, because I literally believe that Jesus was born on the civil New Year, on Rosh Hashanah, the Feast of Trumpets, also known as Yom Teruah, okay? But 6 months prior to this is the Hebrew month of Nisan, or Nisan, right? Which is the first month of the religious year. So the way this worked is starting with the first week of the first month of the Hebrew calendar, the religious calendar, right? Each priestly division would serve for 1 week. Now, there was an exception to this rule, okay? And let me see if I can't grab this here. There it is. We're going to look at this one, okay? Here we go. Now, you'll need to focus in on this here. This is the hypothetical service of the different families, right? The different priestly families, the different divisions, okay, in the year 4 BC, right? Because if you work backwards from what we believe is Jesus's birth date, right? September 11, 3 BC, that means he was conceived 9 months before that. That means he was conceived in December of 4 BC, right? And if you work backwards, that means that John was conceived not 6 months before that, okay, which would have been June of 4 BC, right? So now, if we look at this document and we look at how I've laid it out here, looking at a bunch of calendars, I figured this out. So the first week of Nisan in 4 BC would have been our month of March, and it would have been March 24th to March 31st. That's week number 1. And the first division, the division of Jehoiarib, would have served for that week, right? Now, the next week would have been the equivalent of March 31st to April 7th, and that would have been the priestly course of Jediah, right? But now, if you look carefully at this document, when you look at week 3 and week 4, and then look over here on the side, on the right-hand side, it says this is the Feast of Unleavened Bread. During any of the feasts of the Lord, all the priests reported to the temple. So it would go one division for 1 week, one division for another week, one division for another week. But if and when that got interrupted by the annual feasts, then all of the priests were there, right? So if you look at this chart and you look at this chronology, what you've got is week 1, Jehoiarib, week 2, Jediah, week 3 and 4, all priests, right? Then week 3 of the rotation, okay, week 5 total, but so it's the fifth, so it's the 5th week of the year, but it's going to be the 3rd division of Harim, okay, and then the 6th week, it's Seorim, and then the 7th week, it's Malchijah, and then the 8th week, it's, I'm butchering the pronunciation here, Mijamin, right, I guess, Mijamin, right, and then the 9th week, Hakoz, then the 10th week, you've got the Feast of Pentecost, the Feast of Weeks, so you've got all the priests again, and then when you get to the 11th week, which was in the month of Sivan, right, which is the equivalent of June, and in 4 BC, that would have been June 4th to 11th, that's when the division of Abijah would have been serving in the temple, okay? Very, very, very interesting, because as we're putting the pieces of this puzzle together, if this had not turned out this way, we would have had every right to go, whoa, wait a second, time out. If our hypothesis is that Jesus was born in September of 3 BC, and therefore back up 9 months for his conception, and they're back up 6 months for John the Baptist's conception, well, frankly, just do the math, that should land us in June of 4 BC. That's what we should get. So I did not manipulate this data. This is just laying it out according to the biblical data, the way it's supposed to work. Okay, you start with the first week of the religious year, you plug in the first division. The second week of the religious year, you plug in the second division. If one of the annual festivals comes along, well, then it's all priest for that week or those 2 weeks, right? And then you're back to 1 week and 1 division at a time. So in 4 BC, this is how it would have went down. And look at this. Lo and behold, the division of Abijah would have been serving in the temple in early June of 4 BC, right? So that means that once this happened, and so this would have been the timing of the visitation, right? The timing of the angel Gabriel appearing to Zechariah in the temple, right? And then he tells Zechariah, you're going to have a son and you're going to name him John. And then he goes home and, quote unquote, nature takes its course. It is no great surprise to discover that John would have been conceived in June of 4 BC. And if he was, it fits our chronology absolutely exactly. There's absolutely no problem with it whatsoever. So let me pop up another graphic for you here. Here we go. Boom, boom, bang. So now we're going to look at this one here. Okay. There we go. So this is kind of the sum and substance of what we've been talking about here so far. John the Baptist, see, because what we did is we worked backwards, but now we're working forwards. John the Baptist was conceived in mid to late June of 4 BC. Jesus was conceived 6 months later in mid to late December of 4 BC. So now 9 months later for each of them, John the Baptist is born in mid to late March of 3 BC, and Jesus would have been born in mid to late September of 3 BC. So now what we have is we've got another piece of evidence from the Bible and from history that corroborates what we have been discovering so far, right? Because when, if you go back to what we talked about at the top of the episode, right? Augustus Caesar, 27-14, then Herod, 37-1, the corrected date. So now between 27 and 1 BC, but then we can chop it way down when we consider Herod's margin for error, 2 years. That means it had to be because Herod died in early 1 BC. So that means Jesus had to have been born between early 3 BC and early 1 BC, because he was born when Herod was still alive, right? And then finally, when you throw in the registration, right? The fact that this registration was an oath of allegiance to Augustus Caesar, and it had to be completed no later than early 2 BC, because Caesar was given the title Pater Patriae by the Roman Senate in early February of 2 BC. Okay, so that means that this registration, and of course they had to have time to collect the data and transfer the data to get it to travel from the edges of the empire all the way back to Rome, and collect it all, and dot their I's and cross their T's and do all their due diligence so that they could declare that Caesar was Pater Patriae. But so now we know it's at the barest of minimums, it's got to be from early 3 BC until early 2 BC. So we got a 1 year window, but then now we can narrow it down even further, because we know the decree didn't go out in the winter. The decree would have went out probably in the late spring or early summer. So if the decree went out, say, for example, in May or June, right, and then it had to be done by the following new year, what we would call the new year, January, right? January, February. Now you're looking at a 6-month window, and then now you plug in the fact of when John the Baptist was conceived and when John the Baptist would have been born, and the fact that we are told explicitly that Jesus was conceived and therefore born pretty much exactly 6 months after John. Do those pieces fit together? And the amazing answer is that yes, they absolutely do, which is just stunning, because, as I've been saying, and I've been repeating ad nauseum here, is that we want to follow the evidence. We want to take each piece of evidence and say, okay, where does that point me? What does that do? What kind of picture does it make in this puzzle here? And we are adding pieces of information one at a time, and at least so far, they are all confirming what we are expecting to find. I'm not, like I said, we're not manipulating any of this. This is a matter of public record. This isn't, so this, to follow a common phrase these days, this is science, quote unquote. Actually, it's just evidence. It kind of uses science, but it certainly doesn't use the scientific method. It uses the historical method, which kind of has different rules for evidence, by the way. But that's what we're doing here, is we are simply trying to follow the evidence to determine when Jesus was born. Okay, now something we're going to do in the future, actually we've already done it in a past episode, but we will do it again in the future, is when we look at the astronomical information, right? The astronomical information pinpoints it even more, which is, like I said, I believe that Revelation chapter 12, verse 1, where it talks about a sign in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun and the moon underneath her feet, and on her head a crown of 12 stars, that is an astronomical sign of the birth of Jesus Christ. And when you decipher that sign, it lands you not only, and the thing is, see, that's an unusual sign, a woman clothed with the sun, right? So that means the sun is in Virgo, okay? Now that one thing in and of itself is not all that rare. A woman clothed with the sun is no big deal. The sun will be in Virgo for 30 days every year, guaranteed, right? But it says a woman clothed with the sun and the moon under her feet, okay? Now, it's also not a big deal for both the sun and the moon to be in Virgo. That's going to happen every year, no matter what. But for the woman to be clothed with the sun, that's a unique phrase. And it says that the moon is under her feet. Okay, so this means it has to be a configuration where the sun can't be up by her head, because that wouldn't be clothed with the sun. That would be crowned with the sun, right? And the sun can't be near her feet, because then we'd be told that she's standing on the sun, or the sun is under her feet, right? And then we are told again with the moon, she's not clothed with the moon. She's not crowned with the moon. The moon is under her feet. So this tends to indicate that the moon has to be kind of in the middle of her body, at least, right? A woman clothed with the sun, and then the moon under her feet, that it's some type of configuration where, here's her feet and here's the moon. Whether she's standing on it, is she vertical and upright, and therefore the moon is down here under her feet? But what we show in one of our previous episodes is that the figure of the woman is actually upside down at an angle like this. If you're watching video, it's kind of hard on audio, kind of hard on radio to envision this, but she's upside down at an angle where her head is actually down to the left, or pardon me, down to the right, and her feet are up to the left, and the moon is over here under her feet. So she's not standing on the moon, but the moon is nonetheless under her feet. Okay, so that is a much more unusual sign, much more than just clothed with the sun by itself, and much more than the moon under her feet, right? But then it adds, and on her head was a crown of 12 stars. Now, for a long time, I thought that was a veiled reference to the ecliptic, but then I realized, no, wait a second, that doesn't really make sense, because Virgo is one of the 12 constellations of the ecliptic, right? So if the reference is to Virgo being crowned by the ecliptic, then you would say, well, then she has on her head a crown of 11 stars. And part of the reason we know this is because we have a big clue in how to decipher this sign given to us in Genesis chapter 37. And it's one of Joseph's dreams, right? So let's talk about this for a minute. Since we landed here, let's go there, right? In Genesis 37, Joseph, who is one of the 12 sons of Jacob, who is renamed Israel, right? He has a couple of amazing dreams. And of course, the first dream is of the sheaves bowing down to him, that he and his brothers are out in the field reaping wheat, and the sheaves bow down to him, that the 11 sheaves bow down to him. And, he tells the dream to his brothers. I go off on a tangent about that, and one day we will. He tells the dream to his brothers. Well, I'll tell you this much. He tells the dream to his brothers, and his brothers knew. His brothers knew. Joseph didn't have to interpret the dream. They interpreted the dream themselves. They knew that dream meant that they would bow down to him. So they got angry with him, saying, "Are you joking? You think we're going to bow down to you?" Right? But then Joseph has a second dream, and this is really amazing because it says, and this ties us back to Revelation 12:1. It says that the sun, the moon, and the 11 stars, the 11 constellations bowed down to him, right? And again, he tells the dream to his brothers. He tells the dream to his father, Jacob, and Jacob goes after him this time and says, "Oh, so you think your mother and I are going to bow down to you as well? Not only your brothers, but your mother and me are going to bow down to you as well," which is really interesting because once again, there is nothing in the text that tells us, ready for this? This is gonna bend some people's brains here because you think you know this story, right? There is nothing in the text that tells us that Joseph understood the dreams. Okay, let me repeat that for emphasis. There's nothing in the text that tells us that Joseph understood the dreams. Now, maybe he did, or maybe at least he had a rough idea what they meant. That's reasonable. That's a reasonable conclusion, that he began to interpret the dreams and he had an idea of what they meant, but that's not what the text says. That's just us interpreting and reaching a reasonable conclusion that, he got to thinking about them and went, okay, yeah, there's 11 sheaves and they bowed down to me. I got 11 brothers. So that's got to be my brothers. Okay. That's not unreasonable. And then likewise with the sun, the moon, and the 11 stars, okay, are his 11 brothers, right? And then the sun is Jacob and then the moon is Rachel. Okay. So it's the sun and the moon and the 11 stars bow down to him. But the whole reason I bring that up, okay, see, and so because we all get really weird about saying, well, Joseph was not supposed to tell the dream to his brothers. Yeah, he was. He was totally supposed to. That's how the culture worked at that time. Dreams were considered a divine omen. Okay. So you always shared your dream, especially with your family. If you had a dream that you believed was about your family, you told your family, because that dream was not just for you, that dream was for your family. Okay. And this dream was for that family. It was for the whole family. It wasn't just for Joseph. It was for the entire family. But of course, he tells his brothers, and his brothers are like, oh, yeah, oh, yeah, right, sure, oh, yeah, you arrogant jerk, we're not going to bow down to you, right? Little did they realize that Joseph was effectively going to be a savior for the entire family, and that, yes, they would bow down to him, right? Okay, so that's enough of that tangent for a moment. But the reason I bring that up is because in Joseph's dream, Joseph, in the dream language at any rate, I don't want to say Joseph recognized this, but Jacob did, okay? Because here Joseph tells Jacob the dream, and Jacob knew what it meant. Jacob did not have to have it interpreted for him. Jacob interpreted it himself, and he knew exactly what it meant. It meant that the sun, me, the moon, Rachel, your mother, and the 11 constellations, your 11 brothers, are going to bow down to you. See, so each one of the 12 constellations is one of the 12 sons, and therefore 12 tribes of Israel. Okay. And see, in the dream, there's the acknowledgement that Joseph is one of those tribes and therefore one of those constellations. So therefore, we're told that the 11 stars bowed down to him, right? So this is the reason why I don't believe in Revelation chapter 12, verse 1, that the crown of 12 stars is the ecliptic, because Virgo is one of the 12. Okay. So if the intention is to make the ecliptic the crown, you would have said that upon her head was a crown of 11 stars. So I believe the crown is that statement, the crown of 12 stars, is actually a reference to the constellation Leo, which is actually directly above her head. And oh yeah, by the way, just a coincidence, the sign of Leo is the royal sign, which makes complete sense that it would be considered a crown. Okay, so that makes complete sense, that the crown that is on her head is actually the constellation Leo. And on this particular occasion, see, Leo has 9 what are called NEO stars. That stands for naked eye observation. So if you go out at night and look up at the constellation Leo and the quote unquote picture that is formed of the lion, you can go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Those 9 stars make the picture of the lion. So 9 NEO stars. But then the way Judean archaeo-astronomy works is that it's the backdrop of the constellation, and yet over the backdrop, against the backdrop of the constellation, you've got the fast movers, the planets, okay? The planets move at a much quicker pace than the constellations do. The constellations move annually through the night sky. The planets move day by day by day, meaning you can see Jupiter over there last night and here tonight and there tomorrow night. And the same is true with Mars, Venus, and Saturn. You can watch them move through the night sky on a daily basis. So it's which planets are you seeing against that backdrop helps you determine how Judean archaeo-astronomy works. And I believe this has a lot of influence. That's what we're doing. That's exactly what we're doing right now, is we are interpreting Judean archaeo-astronomy in Revelation 12:1. A woman clothed with the sun and the moon underneath her feet, and on her head a crown of 12 stars, because you had 3 planets in Leo, which now makes a total of 12 stars that formulate the crown. And see, now that is a highly, highly unusual sign. And if we plug that into an astronomy computer program and look for certain parameters, we discover that that sign only occurs about once every 2,000 years, right? And oh yeah, by the way, one of those times was in September of 3 BC, which precisely fits everything else we've been talking about. And seeing, we're not manipulating a thing here. We're just saying this is what we think it believes, and does it fit? And lo and behold, it does. Each new piece of evidence that we have been adding here makes complete sense. So let's go. I just want to go back to this summary statement here real quick. Get this graphic back up again for 1 second. So when we look at this graphic, oh, God darn it, I did that wrong. There we go. John the Baptist was conceived in mid to late June of 4 BC. Jesus was conceived 6 months later in mid to late December of 4 BC, which means John the Baptist was born in mid to late March of 3 BC, and Jesus was born in mid to late September of 3 BC. That is what Zechariah, ministering during the division of Abijah, tells us. So all of that information is cryptically contained in that one reference that says Zechariah of the division of Abijah was ministering in the temple, and all we got to do is unpack what that means. And this is what that means. It means that he was ministering in the temple in June of 4 BC. He got the visitation from Gabriel. He goes home. He and Elizabeth conceive. John is born 9 months later. Jesus is born 6 months after that. And then, like I said, like we've said several times now, when we cross-reference the reign of Augustus with the reign of Herod, and then the 2-year margin for error, and then the oath of registration, the oath of allegiance and the registration, this all comes down to a certain window of time. And now we plug in the astronomy and look what we get. It all lands us in September of 3 BC. Okay, so we're going to wrap it up there for today. I really thank you for joining me. My name is Tim Keyes. This is God Save the King on the Truth Be Told Radio Network. And just a quick reminder, once again, my views are not necessarily the views of the Truth Be Told Radio Network. And there's a wide variety of ways that you can listen to the Truth Be Told Radio Network. Go to www.truthbetoldnetwork.org. Click on the big listen button. Your Android app, the MyTuner app, Wi-Fi radio, TuneIn radio, Alexa, Google, and Apple home devices. And then, of course, dialing in at 641-741-2866 or 717-567-4977 to listen to the Truth Be Told Radio Network. So once again, thank you for joining me. This is Tim Keyes with God Save the King. Listen to me every Friday night on TBTRN at 10 p.m. Eastern. Thank you and have a great evening.